Morning, seventh graders. It's me, Mr. Stark. It is Monday, November 30th, and today we are going to talk a little bit about classification. But prior to that, let's go back and do a little review of what we did last week. We talked about where life came from. We had two concepts that were there. We had spontaneous generation, where life was coming from non-living things. And then there was many scientists that tried to disprove that and come up with a concept that would replace it, and that was biogenesis, and that life would come from living things, and that's kind of where we're at today. Uh, these organisms that we've been talking about, where living things come from, um, in past times there have been people that have been trying to classify them, organize them, make them easier to understand and learn more about. There's three scientists that are on the screen here. The first is Aristotle. He was an early person in classification scheme. We've got a little picture of him, and his theories were that you could classify everything by land, by water, by air. So it lived on land, it lived in the water, or it lived in the air. Well, when we got into that a little bit deeper, there was just a lot of things that overlapped, and some organisms could live that could fly, that could be in the water. There were some that could live on the land, that could live in the water, and that just didn't work out too well. So, years later, Carlos Linnaeus, another scientist that's known for classification and still used some of his information to name today, his naming system. Okay, it's called binomial nomenclature, and so everything that we have, every species that we know of that we have learned about, has a common name and has a genus and species name, or otherwise known as a scientific name. So we just finished up with the white-tailed deer season. The common name for a white-tailed deer is white-tailed deer. The scientific name is Odocoilus virginianus. That is something that is put out in Latin language, and we use Latin because it does not change meanings. The words that are Latin is not a language that is spoken much anymore, and so the definitions of the words do not change. The one thing about Carlos Linnaeus is that everything that he did with his genus and species naming, binomial nomenclature, was classified in a biblical sense, meaning that all things are on the earth the way that they were created, or that all things are created as they are. Charles Darwin, another scientist that came along years later, did a bunch of studying. He did a study traveled the world for like 5 years and looked at different organisms and different places in the world, and he proposed a thing called natural selection. Natural selection is kind of like things are naturally selected by nature to survive. His classifications changed to reflect how organisms are related, how they're connected to their ancestors, or as another word he uses, adaptive radiations. So organisms would diversify as they adapt to ecological niches. So in that video you saw last week on eyewitness life, they were talking about the tortoises in the Galapagos Islands and how they had developed a notch in the back of their shell to help them lift their head higher. Well, that adaptation, that thing right there, naturally selected the tortoise to live longer and survive better. Okay, so I'm going to switch to another slide here, just a minute. And the things with Darwin's natural selection, they had four main points there that were important: variation, inheritance, a high rate of population growth, and differential survival and reproduction. So let's take a look at that. Variation within a population is that some traits can be expressed in various ways and make individuals look to behave differently. So hair color, body size, eye color, reaction to facing danger. Everybody does that a little bit differently. Inheritance. Inheritable traits are transferred from one generation to the next. So, the traits that you got from your parents, your mom and your dad, your individual traits. There's things that you have that you got from your dad, and there are things that you have that you got from your mother. A high rate of population growth. In each generation, the population produces more offspring than what our local environment can support. So what happens is there is a substantial mortality. Now, with this being said, there's the ones that survive. These are the ones that are going to have the best traits for living in that environment. The ones that die or suffer mortality, these are the ones that don't necessarily have the best traits to survive and pass on. So individuals with the best combination of traits survive in the actual environment, and they will reproduce or produce more offspring for the next generation. So if you have the better traits and you live long enough to reproduce and pass on your traits. Classification has a system that they use to organize and specifically separate out different organisms down to a genus and species name. So every organism on the planet fits into in several kingdoms. Those are broken up into phylums and classes and orders and families, and finally given a genus and a species name. There is an acronym that we use in the science world to keep us remembering what these are, and helps us remember what order they come in. So the acronym for the classification schemes here is King Philip came over from Germany, special variety. So King is for kingdom, phylum is for Philip, came is for class, over is for order, from is family, Germany is genus, and special is species, and there are different varieties of species depending on where you live. So we have 5 main kingdoms. We're going to kind of take a look at those, and then we're going to get more in depth into classification. But five kingdoms. We have, first is the Monera. Monera is going to be consisting of your bacteria and archaea. These are just like little simple organisms. They're prokaryotes. They have one single cell membrane, and then everything is stuffed inside of them. They're not very organized at all. So that's Monera. And then we have Protista. These are the single-celled organisms. You can see some of them here. And they have a single-cell membrane. They have a nucleus. All their organelles, all their little pieces inside of them are membrane-bound. Very highly organized. That's the protists. We have fungus. That would be things like your spores and mushrooms and things like that. And we have plants and animals. These are the Monera, the protists, plants, fungi, and animals are your 5 kingdoms. And they can be grouped on nutrition source. So we just give you an example of, after the kingdom, we have a phylum, and they're grouped by body plan. There are 33 total phyla. Human is phylum Chordata. They have bilateral symmetry. That means if you split them down the middle, they have 2 equal halves. At some point in their life, they have gill slits. They have a notochord and a nerve cord. They have a head, they have a tail, a digestive tract, and 2 openings, one at each end. So thus far we have kingdom and phylum, and then I'm going to jump over to this other slide here, class. Okay, we're going to look at some classes of vertebrates, and I'll just run through them today, and we'll come back to them again tomorrow. There's 7 classes of vertebrates. They are the Agnatha. That would be like jawless fish. Those are like lamprey. Lamprey are fish that they attach themselves and they suck fluids out of fish like lake trout and salmon. Then we have the chondrichthyes. These are the cartilaginous fish. They don't have any bones. They have cartilage that give them their support, and that would be like the sharks. Then we have osteichthyes. Those are the bony fish like your perch and walleye and northern. And supposedly there's a few people that are fishing up on Red Lake this week. So maybe next weekend I'll get up there. Amphibia, those are your frogs and toads, and their eggs must be kept moist. Reptilia, these are the turtles and snakes. They have an egg, an amniote egg, where it's like your chicken egg, where it has a shell around it that preserves the water and moisture inside of it. We have aves, which are birds. They also have an amniote egg, and they are fertilized within the female. And then finally, we have mammalia. They're mammals. They're conceived in the female. And they're heterodonts and endothermic, meaning that they regulate their temperature from within. So these are things that we're going to come back to. We're going to hit these, look at these a little bit more in detail. What I want you to do today is, I'm going to go back to another slide here. So thus far we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 scientists that have all done different things. We have John the Baptist. He wrote a recipe for mice. Francisco Redi, he did the meat and fly experiment to try and disprove spontaneous generation. Lazaro, he did the experiment by boiling broths to get rid of the microorganisms. Pasteur, he followed up with a similar experiment, and he was able to come up with and prove that spontaneous generation is not a real thing, or that things don't come from non-living things, that he proved that they come from living things. So he came up with a theory of biogenesis. We had Alexander Oparin. He had a theory about the early atmospheric conditions and what types of chemicals were there, the methane, ammonia, water vapor, and hydrogen. We had Miller that designed an experiment to take those first atmospheric gases and had them go through a series of tests or experimental procedures and produce amino acids. And then today we learned about Aristotle, who was a classification guy by land, by water, by air. Carlos Linnaeus, another classification guy that had a two-name naming system, binomial nomenclature, and then Charles Darwin that used natural selection to classify things. So what I would like you to do today is I'd like you to make, on Google Classroom, I want you to make a set of 9 flashcards, put their names on one side and what their accomplishments were on the other side of the card, and study those a little bit. We are going to have a little online quiz about these guys here probably tomorrow. Okay, so make some flashcards, study their names. It'll be more of a matching thing, so don't worry about spelling. Study their names and what they accomplished, what they did in the science world. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye.